It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. So while I do that, Connor, if you want to begin sharing your screen. This evening we have Dr. Connor Wood with us. Dr. Wood is a research associate with the K. Lisa Yang Center for Conservation Bioacoustics at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So we're super excited to hear some information about this program called BirdNET. If you're not familiar with it, then you're in the right spot. Dr. Wood studied small mammals during his master's work at the University of Maine, but moved up the food chain to study spotted owls during his PhD with the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He says this felt a bit treasonous at first, starting with small mammals and moving up the chain to spotted owls, but that he got it over it because owls are wicked cool. Okay, great. Dr. Wood, we're ready for you. Thanks. Take it away.
Awesome. I hope everyone can hear me. If you're not hearing me, put it in the chat or something. Although, yeah, cool. So, well, thanks, Jason, and to the whole group for the invite. It's really great to be here this evening, sort of digitally joining you. I'm going to kick things off actually with Cornell's land acknowledgement, which is to say that Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gaikano, the Cayuga Nation. The Gaikano are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the Gaikano dispossession and honor their ongoing connection of the Gaikano people, past and present, to these lands and waters. And I guess I can add a sort of personal note that having moved here from Madison, Wisconsin, which is an isthmus, I'm also an avid follower, or used to be an avid follower of the winter arrival of bald eagles. And then we'd get a ton of loons coming through. I lived right on a bay of one of those lakes and loved seeing the loons come in March. So yeah, I do miss living right on a big lake. There are no loons and eagles though in my talk, but I hope it will still be enjoyable. Jason invited me to talk about the BirdNET project, and so that is pretty much what I'll do, but I'd like it to be more of a conversation. If people have questions, drop in the chat, just kind of chime in. I don't think I'll see you if you wave. I've kind of kept the Zoom window pretty small for myself, but yeah, let me know one way or the other if you have a question, and we can just go from there. So just briefly about me, I guess Jason kind of covered this, but I grew up in the Midwest and then have been in the Northeast for a long time, an undergraduate and master's degree, and then have done a lot of field work across the American West, and particularly in California. So kind of a diverse geography of, I guess, ecological training, and also just becoming familiar with the different birds and critters. And I really didn't become much of I started with birds growing up as a kid. My parents were big bird watchers and did some field work with birds, but then kind of pivoted away from birds until somewhat recently. So that's partly why some of the projects I'm working on now, I have some bonus slides at the end of I'm starting a toad project. So I'm kind of a generalist when it comes to species. So this is kind of my plan for this evening, just 3 parts. And the first is about the BirdNET algorithm. On a very literal level, what is BirdNET? Then I'll talk about how I'm using BirdNET to study the bird community of the Sierra Nevada in California. And then I'll talk about the BirdNET app, which is a way that all of you for free can use BirdNET too. So again, please chime in if you have any questions. So the BirdNET algorithm, this is not going to be a computer science talk. I'm not a computer scientist. BirdNET is an algorithm developed by my colleague, Dr. Stefan Kahl. He basically did this as his PhD project when he was he's German and did his work in Chemnitz, Germany, but also in collaboration with fellow German but Cornell Lab faculty Holger Klink. And that was really happening at the same time that I was starting my owl work in California. So we've been on this parallel track and are now working together, which is a lot of fun. And basically what BirdNET can do is identify birds by sound alone. And what makes it really cool is that it's highly accurate and it's also highly flexible. So the accuracy part is key because people have been trying to make bird classification tools for a long time. And a lot of them have kind of fallen flat. And so his is really one of the first that actually works really well. And the flexibility is really critical because it means we're not just stuck with the birds that are here in the Finger Lakes region where there's a ton of Cornell data, or in North America or Europe, or even we're not even stuck with birds at all. He can just keep on building in sound classes as we have training data for them. And so ultimately what I think is that BirdNET is going to really does have the potential to revolutionize avian ecology. It's really opening up a lot of new research and conservation pathways for us. So that's kind of conceptually what it is. On a more technical level, BirdNET is a type of artificial intelligence. And AI is a kind of a buzzword that you may hear quite a bit these days. But it's really just AI is flexible completion of tasks without human intervention. So it's a pretty general term, but it's also can be very specific. So like a little vacuuming robot, you know, those little like hockey puck looking robots that drive around and vacuum up your mess. On some level, like that is the completion of a task without human intervention. So there's AI generally, and one subset of artificial intelligence is called machine learning. And this is a statistical learning algorithm that doesn't need programming. You don't have to tell it how to do its job. You just have to give it its task, and it basically just tests and tests and tests all sorts of different ways of doing that task and tracks its success rate. And that's kind of the statistical component. So things like music recommendations. If you listen to, if you use Spotify or Pandora or any of these online music services, they track what you're listening to and then suggest things based on what other people are listening to that have pretty similar taste. That is a machine learning task. And what's important is that it requires training data. So in the case, that would be your music listening history. In the case of BirdNET, that would be examples of bird calls. So 800 examples of a northern cardinal. That's a really valuable set of training data. Although then you only have something that can recognize a cardinal. You need lots of examples for lots of species to really have a very broad ranging tool. And then finally, the subset of there's a subset of machine learning called deep learning. And this is where it gets more technical, and I'm really bumping up at the edge of my computer science terminology limits here, but this is how the algorithm learns from the examples, machine learning, and then it filters the input data through successive layers. So if you think about an image, or actually we can stick with music, one layer to classifying music in a birdsong kind of context would be the bass notes, low frequency sounds. That would be one layer of description. What's happening at these low frequencies? Another layer would be high frequency or medium frequency. So and the machine is able to, the computer generates these layers itself, just based on sifting through all these examples. And it's really inspired by human neurology. It's like, that's kind of how our brains work, which is pretty cool. So in most cases, artificial intelligence is very narrow. It's extremely good at a very specific task, classifying birds, right? This isn't really the scary AI that's going to become conscious and take over the world kind of idea. In many cases, AI is very present and very benign, and even kind of fun and helpful in the case of BirdNet. So the training data part is really critical. And what Stefan had that successive generations of people didn't, or didn't to the same scale, is vast online archives of audio data. So the Cornell Lab runs the Macaulay Library, and there's also another project called Xenocanto. And in both, there's now millions of bird sound samples between these two databases. And basically, Stefan downloaded all of them and used that to train BirdNet. And the version that is out, the version that you guys would be using if you're to download the app, which I would encourage you to do because it's free and it's fun, it knows 984 species. That's 95% of North American and European birds. And so it's quite a lot of information. So 1.5 million training data samples went into that. Now, if you download BirdNet in a different country, or the latest version now is up to 3,000 species of birds. So that's multiple continents, another 1 million samples, and Stefan's working on adding in more birds. And what's really fun about this is that the process gets better because of BirdNet app users, because there's an option in the app, if those of you who aren't familiar with it, where you can record something and BirdNet will give you a guess, but then you can hit a button and say, that's correct, or that is wrong. And then that info goes back to us, and Stefan can use it the next time he is building the newest iteration of the model. So how does it function? So sounds can be represented as images called spectrograms. So what you see there on the right, the blue squiggles are sound waves. They're really, really compressed, which is why it just looks like spikes. But in that case, it's actually the spotted owl call from my PhD work. And I don't think I put the audio in, so I will. It sounds like this. Woo, woo, woo. And what you see below that is a spectrogram. That's where the computer takes fancy math and translates those sound waves into a two-dimensional image, and it just classifies high sound energy as a bright color and low energy as a dark color, and the position vertically of that blotch of bright color corresponds with this frequency. So in some ways, it's a bit like sheet music. So what BirdNet does, converts the audio to a spectrogram. It computes the similarity of that piece of audio to all of the classes that it knows. And then it does some post-processing and says, okay, well, most of those are junk. They're nothing like it. These are the 3 best guesses. And that's pretty much how it works. And the reason we do this, the reason we convert it to an image, is that image recognition, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but image recognition software and computation is really advanced. And so if we can take sound and translate it into an image, we've all of a sudden got all of this great research we can draw on to inform our project. So you can see this on your, if you have your many smartphones will autofocus on a face. This is me pulling the very last recording unit of my first PhD field season, so I'm pretty happy. So there's just a bunch of training data of this is what a human looks like. And the phone's like, okay, well, that's close enough. I'll focus on that. So you can imagine an autofocus for birds would just need to know, oh, that's a tiny little great horned owl on the screen. I know what owls look like. I can focus on that. Same principle with the sound. Here we've got a barred owl call, sound waves converted to the spectrogram. We can just focus right on that and identify it. So the accuracy is high, as I said. There's this sort of performance metric that's called mean average precision, which is the average prediction accuracy for all predictions for each for one species, averaged across all species. So it's the average of the average. For the BirdNet, the first generation BirdNet, it's almost 80%. Second generation, it's a little over 80. And then I'm using a custom version for my research right now that's about 0.85. So basically, from a user perspective, that means that most of the time, for most species, it's right, which is really great. And a ton of validation effort went into that, which is slow and tedious, but also really necessary. So to put this in context, we've talked about the technical side, the functional side of BirdNet. What is it practically? Well, when I was doing my owl work, I spent months developing two little, what are called template detectors. And this is basically a custom way to detect spotted owl and barred owl calls. And they're barely transferable. Even within our own study, there's challenges. And I kind of equate this to bird watching with a shotgun, which is what they used to do. Now we have a single tool that can identify most birds with a single scan with applied to almost any type of audio. So not only I was having to scan 100,000 hours twice in a row just to get two species, and I can only use it on my data. Now we have this tool where you can scan your 100,000 hours once and get all the species to some extent, and you can do any old audio set. So it's really, really exciting for me as someone who did it the old way to now have this tool available. It's flexible, it's scalable, and it's pretty easy for Stefan to add new things. So adding more birds, but also other things that make sound, like toads, frogs, coyotes, wolves, monkeys, all sorts of things. My cat's under my desk. And what this does is both adds value to existing data sets, and it lets us dream big for new projects. So that's really what I mean when it's practically speaking. Here's a clip of a male spotted owl hooting and a female spotted owl hooting. And this was a pretty cool little interaction for me to find. But that's all I really knew about that data just from an automated signal detection perspective. When I scan it, that's what I get, these two spotted owl hits. But this was happening at the dawn chorus. So when I went and reviewed this little clip, I could see that there's all these birds singing, but all I can do is just get these two spotted owls at the moment. So this is the BirdNet algorithm is really exciting to me. These part 4 and 5 actually is a typo, but basically, what are the best uses? Well, I just want to talk about two of them today. The first is bulk scanning of passive recordings, which is a lot of what I do. And then analysis of focal recordings made on mobile devices. And that is something that everyone can do. This third option, real-time analysis, is pretty exciting, but we're just getting started on this. And this is where you could have a device deployed off in the wilderness, as long as there's, off in the woods, as long as there's cell coverage, we can be running BirdNet continuously as the audio is coming in, and then it texts you if you get some sort of really priority species or acoustic event. So that's a pretty exciting possibility. So that wraps up part 1, the technical stuff. Does anybody have any questions before we keep moving? Yeah.
Connor, I'm curious, I was going to ask this later, but I think it maybe does pertain to what you just spoke about. I imagine that there must be some technical differences among all the different types of devices out there making recordings. How has that factored into the development of this algorithm? I mean, like having an actual parabolic microphone versus a Google Pixel phone or an iPhone or whatever.
Yeah, it's really, it's important. It's very important, but you don't notice the well, if you have a low quality microphone, it's going to be tough for BirdNet to get to be accurate, because there's going to be a lot of it'll just be like what we'd call a low fidelity signal. like it's distorted. Maybe there's just a lot of background. The signal, a faraway signal, is very weak compared to loud foreground sounds. Another challenge is that using different microphones, or even the same microphone but different recording settings, if you change your program through time, which we've had to do, then those BirdNET scores mean different things. So a score, you get an output and it says, BirdNET will say, that's a hermit thrush with a score of 0.7. You go back, you record that hermit thrush, the same exact setting, or you set up another microphone in the same tree with different settings, it's going to be a totally different, it could be a totally different score. So that is a real challenge for sure. So it's transferable. Like the tool BirdNET is very transferable, but it's not a magic bullet in the sense that it doesn't just give you the truth. You have to earn the truth. There's a fair amount of validation work that goes in. Yeah, other questions?
I have a question. My work with BirdNET has been using an iPhone SE, which has got a decidedly low quality microphone. And often I'm away at a distance from the bird I'm trying to record, and there's some background noise. Are there any devices that you can suggest, perhaps enhancements that could be applied to the iPhone to make a higher quality recording?
That's a great question. I do my bird netting with an iPhone SE also, and I am sometimes frustrated. Like you have to be, especially, you kind of have to be pretty close to the bird, and even if you crop it really carefully just in the call, like sometimes that's not good enough. I've seen folk, like some users shared some system where they rigged up a little micro, like bought an sort of aftermarket mic that they attached to their phone. So you could do that if you wanted, but yeah, it's tough when you have a microphone that was chosen because its purpose is to pick up a voice that's 1 inch away. It's definitely an imperfect tool, but so yeah, sorry, Don.
Connor, how does this BirdNET compare to Merlin Sound ID?
That's a great question. And it's funny, it's like a little bit, the lab could have done a better job of rolling out Merlin and explaining the difference between the two. Merlin uses the Macaulay library, which BirdNET does also. And I think they're basically, they have unique strengths and weaknesses. My understanding of the Merlin team or like the Merlin algorithm, is that they really targeted these really high quality training examples. And what that means is that sometimes it's really good. But BirdNET has a lot more messy, sort of what we call soundscape examples, where it's recorded from a mic that's just sitting on a tree, and we've had an analyst go through and be like, oh yeah, that's a cardinal or whatever. And that gives it BirdNET more power in these monitoring situations because it's familiar with messy data. That's not just something with a parabolic microphone, like a fancy directional microphone that's targeting a bird. The other difference is that largely, I don't know if this is a performance thing, but the Merlin app is largely considered like a teaching or learning tool. And I've found BirdNET I've learned, I'm not a great birder by ear. I'm actually pretty bad because I'm kind of tone deaf, but like it certainly helped me learn some birds, but it's kind of on some level, it's fundamentally a research tool. And that's, I'll share some stuff with you guys at the end about that. Other questions?
Connor, there is one more question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
It's from Dory. It says, how does BirdNET pick out a single bird in a chorus of birds?
That's a great question. That's something that is a huge challenge in acoustics, like no matter the algorithm or anything, it's just a huge challenge. And so BirdNET does okay. I've seen it like when I'm going through and looking at results, like sometimes it nails it. It helps. Well, one of the cool things that Stefan did is he generated, when he was taking the training data, he would take examples and basically systematically distort them. So he would stretch them a little bit, stretch them a little bit, and then stack things on there, layer on some interference. And so that to try to really push the algorithm to learn things in sort of real world conditions. So that on like a very technical level, that's how to the extent that BirdNet or anything can pick out a sound and identify it in a very complex environment, that's how. It's on the strength of the training data, but it's a huge challenge. Yeah, overlapping, you know, if it's a high frequency bird that there's not too much going on in that upper frequency band, that helps because on some level it's not that it's simultaneous, it's that it's simultaneous in time and frequency. That's when it's a huge problem. Cool, well, I will keep rolling in the interest of time and then, you know, just drop stuff in the chat and then, you know, we can keep going. So as I mentioned, my owl work, well, maybe I didn't totally mention this. My dissertation I did at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The project was centered in the northern Sierra Nevada, California, which is the Sierra Nevada is the core range of the California spotted owl, which is one of 3 subspecies of spotted owl. And we were doing these massive scale acoustic surveys because barred owls were invading the range of the spotted owl and basically outcompeting them. But we made this fateful decision in 2016 to leave the recorders running, start them in the late afternoon before the owls are active, and let them run well into the morning after the owls have gone to sleep. Because eventually there was going to be the tools to analyze that. And that BirdNet is that tool. Now we have it. So it's been really exciting. Like the last couple of weeks, I've been actually getting to look at this bird community data that's been in the making since really the fall of 2016. So it's like been a really, really powerful, exciting experience for me. So I guess I'm just going to dive in and just share stuff. We've done enough technical stuff. So like, here's some cool BirdNet results. Here we've got a hermit warbler and a Townsend's warbler. And I've got the hermit warbler song in here. Let's see if that, oh, I didn't. Maybe you heard a little dee, 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 dee. So what you see here in these discs are the results from one location from one day, and a red dot. So time goes around the clock, if you will. It is like a clock, 24-hour clock, I guess. The gray arc on the bottom is when the unit was off, and the red dots are hermit or bird detections. That's for that species. And the farther out they are, the higher the BirdNet's confidence score is. So these way out dots are, you can be very increasingly confident that's a hermit warbler. So we can see an interesting difference between these 2 fairly closely related species. It seems like there's a hermit warbler like sitting on top of this recording unit. And right at like 5:50, it starts singing and it doesn't let up. And it's still singing when the unit shuts off at 10 a.m. And it's already singing at 5 p.m. when the unit clicks on, and then the sun goes down and the bird shuts off. In contrast, that Townsend's warbler is singing a little bit in the morning, and you know, at that level of confidence score, it might not be a Townsend's warbler. So you can see that that could be both a confusion event or maybe more likely a spatial difference, where you have a bird that's sitting on top of the unit, singing its heart out, and bam, BirdNet, the recorder's getting everything, BirdNet's getting everything. In contrast, we could have our little Townsend warbler singing its heart out, but it's way off in the distance. So it's hopping around in some faraway tree, and it hops to the edge of the tree, and its song just gets it to the recorder and gets picked up and identified. So that's kind of a cool little case. Same location, same day. Here we have a black-headed grosbeak, which sounds like this. Oh, I barely heard that on my computer. I don't know if you guys, well, sounds like something. Okay. We've got, this is more, again, we have this morning bird, and it looks like there's a couple of discrete bouts of calling, right? It sings right at 6, a little after 7, a couple times after 8. Cassin's vireo has a similar pattern, although it's singing a lot more. It's got these big spikes right at sunrise, another spike at about 8:30, and then it's actually singing quite a bit in the evening, and then right there at that dusk chorus again. And then, let's see, here we have a Western tanager, which is one of my favorite birds. And this is another bird that's sitting right on top of the unit, just singing all morning, nonstop. This audio is from early May. So we're in like prime breeding season right now. It is singing, pretty much incessantly. Mountain chickadee, tiny bit in the morning, and then it looks like this bird, there's someone there singing for a little bit right at dusk. And I feel pretty good about those classifications for both of these species. BirdNET performs really well. Here we've got our little mountain chickadee. Maybe, I don't know if you guys heard that. Sounds a lot like our familiar chickadee. It's like kind of buzzy, I think, more buzzy. So this is one way that we can represent the data. We can see these cool, just really on like a minute by minute basis, these cool patterns and in the way these birds are behaving. Not to mention which birds are present and which birds we're not detecting on that morning. So let's see. That is, and actually that recorder, what we've got here, I ripped this slide out of a talk I'm preparing. So this is something that I've shared it with my PhD advisor, and he shared it with 2 folks at the Forest Service, and that's it. So only 3 other people have seen this slide. This is a subset of the Northern Sierra Nevada. If you look up the town of Oroville, Oroville is in the bottom left corner of this map. And so the elevation in the bottom left corner, you're getting down to the Central Valley of California, which is, it's off the map, you get to like 200 feet elevation. And by the top right corner of the map, you're at 6,500 feet elevation. So it's a huge elevational gradient here. And this is just a subset of our coverage. Each of these dots is a recording unit. And you can see it's spanning a pretty big area. Sadly, in 2019, or in the fall of 2020, a huge fire burned through this area. This was the North Complex fire. The Dixie fire, which you maybe heard about in the news, which burned almost 1 million hectares, started immediately north of this fire. So a vast amount of, actually my original PhD study area burned just in the last 2 years, which is pretty sad for me, and especially for the town of Greenville, the people who lived in the town of Greenville, which burned to the ground. So what you see here, though, is this massive big red patch. That's all high severity fire. And the crews were able to get back out into this fire. We had the recording units there before the fire. The very next year, we're back at it, putting these units out again. So what we have ultimately in this case, 171 sites right within range of this fire. Then we have almost 130,000 hectares burned. The very next year, 200 sites right around this fire. And so we've got a ton of information here to do what's called a before-after control impact study, which is a pretty powerful experimental design It's actually not something you really get to do very much in ecology. Ecology tends to be pretty messy. You do the best with what you can get. In this case, we have sites that were outside the fire and then burned. We have sites that are outside the fire and then stayed outside the fire. So we've got these 4 different conditions. And so we can compare not just are there spotted owls or the 1 or 2 species that we've developed a detector for. Now with BirdNET, we can look at how has this giant fire affected the entire bird community. And so based on some early outputs, we have a lot of information, over 4 million bird detections with an average confidence across those 4 million of almost 94% accuracy. So it's a lot of pretty reliable information. And for 2021, it was that very good. It wasn't a plant, but I was at Jason's question about recording settings. Like if you change them, you get different performance. And that's been on the front of my mind lately. This is what I'm working on, like literally right now, when the sun's up. Change the recording settings, apply the same algorithm, and we can get better classification, but we had to redo all the thresholds and it generates different results. But this sets us up to learn a lot about the forest, and really what motivates me as a scientist, or on some level, like as a person, is to try to make sure that these birds and this whole ecosystem is still with us, even on like another 10 years, not to mention another 50 or 100 years. Sierra Nevada is a really special place to me, and I mean, it's no more special than anywhere else, anywhere. And so that's what I think is really important, is being able to do these studies and get a lot of information. With the combination of these acoustic surveys and BirdNET, we can now look at what happened to the whole bird community and understand where do we prioritize our conservation resources. So that's what I'm working on right now. But a cool output from these sites is that I can look at the acoustic activity of these birds now across a whole big elevational range and across a 4 to 5 week deployment. So I've got my favorite, actually these are 2 of my favorite birds, dark-eyed junco and western tanager. And each little row here is a single recording site from that map. Each column is a day. And then the color of each little pixel is coded for the number of high confidence bird detections on that day. So you can see, especially for that western, both of these birds are really prevalent. This is 2020 pre-fire, and really prevalent across the study area. And then there's this clear seasonal burst of activity. It's kind of an artificial burst. A lot of the units didn't start recording until partway through. But yeah, and by the end of the season, everything's pretty quiet in the forest. Just in contrast, green-tailed towhee is a low elevation species. So really, we're not picking them up, those high elevation sites. And I've sorted that, I should have said. The top of the page is low elevation, bottom is high, which saying it out loud feels kind of backwards. But when I was making these grids, it made sense, I guess. And the Pacific slope flycatcher kind of has this opposite pattern. They're more of a high elevation species. So to just kind of wrap this bird part up, or this Sierra part up pretty quickly, we've got a lot of information in aggregate between the 2 years. That's 140 locations, but the project is now, we're working on a scale of almost 2,000 locations across the entire Sierra Nevada. So we have a kind of a staggering amount of information. And I think we're really in a position where we can finally start looking at bird diversity, not just patterns in 2 species of owls. So that wraps up the California sort of bird community part. I'm happy to take some questions here if people have them, but I'd also like to get into the BirdNET app in the last little bit of time. So if you have a burning question, no pun intended, drop it in the chat and we'll maybe try to circle to them at the end. But I'm going to go ahead into the app. So can I use BirdNET? Yes. and I hope you do. It's a free app for Android and iOS. There's, for what it's worth, 10 different languages for the user interface and 22 languages for the bird's common names. And got a little video that Stefan made that shows how it works. So it's got a real-time spectrogram. This is if you hit the sort of record button, it's listening. And then you can see there's little bird chirps showing up there, maybe faintly in green on the screen. You can, this is Stefan's narration, so I don't have, there we go. There's our nice nearby bird. You can pause the recording, highlight that call, and press analyze. And in this case, it's a common fire crest. I think Stefan picked European birds because he's European. And so then it gives you your prediction, and then you can link to information about the bird. So there's certainly a bit of a learning curve, but it's, I think, a pretty fun little tool. So should you use BirdNET? Yes, and I think it can help both of us. This is, again, this is like a static view of the app interface. You select, you've got your scrolling spectrogram, you select your call, and then, again, you get this prediction with metadata, and there's this feedback button that says, you can say, yeah, that's correct, or it's not, or I'm not sure. You're also able to view your own results and explore the sort of, it's called explore your area. You can see what other folks have found in your region. And BirdNET, the BirdNET app has been pretty successful. Just in 2020, by the end of 2020, by the end of 21, what am I trying to say? No, it's by the end of 20, there are almost 2 million users, and it's definitely launched past 2 million users globally. This is a map just from 2020, and you can see there's really great buy-in, especially in Europe, and certainly Germany is our best BirdNET app usage country, but that's because Stefan has done a lot of German language media interviews. So I'm now trying to do my part, get the word out in the United States. But there's really good coverage. And there's some fun patterns in that coverage. The thick blue line is just the number of installations, and the thin green line is the number of daily observations. And so in both cases, there's this spike in BirdNET use and interest in the spring. And that's, I think, because that's when most people are hearing birds, right? That's when they're there. That's when people are most likely to be like, hey, what am I hearing? It's also kind of fun to see that there's daily patterns, that usage spikes on Sunday. That seems to be the day that people go out and look for birds and bring their smartphones. So it's kind of fun to see these little patterns. But also, this was in March through May of 2021. Even on the off days, we're getting 60,000 observations a day, which is pretty awesome. So what can we do with these observations? And these slides are also something that almost no one has seen. They're figures from a paper that we've submitted and is under review. So yeah, you get a sneak peek. So the white-throated sparrow is known to have a dialect. It goes dee 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 dee. I'm more familiar with the dee dee dee. That's what I think. But moving over the last 30 years or so, starting in the West and moving east, it's dropping that third note. So it's switching from a triplet to a doublet at the end. And all of these dots are BirdNET app observations from 2020. And I went through and manually classified a couple thousand. It was like two or 3,000 of these sparrow calls, and just classified them as double or triple. And then we can map them and see where is this sort of flowing wave of the new dialect. And it was cool because we actually found that the only other report of this dialect suggested that the double note, the double dialect, was wiping out the triplet. But we found that actually there's still these pockets or even pockets of triplets far in the west, and also just kind of an intermixing. So that was kind of a fun little discovery. Sticking with that same theme, we did the same thing with a bird called the yellowhammer in Europe, which has a really distinctive, a really broad repertoire. And there's all these subtypes. But again, I went through and just manually classified almost 4,000 of these, and just mapped out for whatever reason it's B type and X type. And we can see with really, especially in Germany, where there's tons of BirdNet app users, we can see with really high resolution these spatial patterns of the dialects of these birds. You can also map birds' migrations. So this is the common crane, a European species, and they overwinter in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, and also North Africa. And then their breeding grounds are in Northern Europe, Poland, and just largely Poland is where they breed a little bit, in Germany as well. And so we can see that flyway. You can see that straight. The BirdNet observations are coded. Yellow is peak breeding season, and then on either side of it tracks towards dark blue, which is the winter weeks. And so we can really see this flyway very clearly, which is pretty cool. And I think the migration aspect is where we really get into some of the fun potential like conservation applications of getting really immediate, verifiable bird locations in real time. Where are these birds? Can we try to do what you might call like pop-up conservation type projects, where it's rather than trying to buy land or set aside a nature preserve year round, what if you can, and this is something people have done in California, you rent agricultural land that's not being farmed at the moment, right in the early breeding season, no one's planted yet, but waterfowl are coming through. What they've done in California is they rent rice fields from farmers. They'll pay them to flood the field when all these migratory waterfowl are coming through. The birds get a ton of habitat. The farmers get some extra money in the non-farming season. And then the conservation groups, and on some level, then the rest of society, get to have more robust bird populations, because these really birds get a nice stopover spot on their 1,000-mile journeys. So got some more maps here. I also, though, I'm basically at the end of the migration part, but I have a whole folder of like tons of North American and European birds with little animations. So what we could do is I'll just go to my concluding slides, and then we can open up for questions, and those questions can include, will you show me the migration of XYZ species? So I don't think that the BirdNet app is the future of citizen science, but I certainly think it is a future, and I think it can be an important part of the future. Smartphones are really common. And as I was saying at the beginning, AI-based species identification is getting better and better, and it doesn't require any special skills. So for comparison, BirdNet had over 1 million users in its second year of existence, which was 2020. So I guess the 2 million mark it hit in 21, by the end of 21. eBird has been around for 17 years and had 300,000 participants in 2020. And that's not at all to say that one is better than the other. eBird is incredibly valuable. I hope it goes on forever. But the fact that all you need is a smartphone is really powerful. That opens up a lot of doorways for people. More people can participate in citizen science and bird conservation if all they need is a smartphone. You don't need to know how to identify any birds. You don't need binoculars. You just need to have a smartphone and have some time to go out and listen, and certainly some patience for the fact that it's not the best microphone. And what we want is for people to be citizen scientists, not just citizen sensors that collect data for us. What we want is for this to become a really interactive project where app users are able to do analyses with their own data, able to connect with their friends, and have little competitions, and hopefully connect with us. And we also can we can connect with users and also still do cool bird science. So that's kind of this long-range vision for the BirdNet app project. So that is pretty much the end of my talk. I know I had to speed up there at the end, but now I will just open things up for questions, comments, whatever folks have. And I don't mind sticking around for another few minutes. I know I think are like right at time, Jason, but
we're
yeah.
good. We got plenty of time. So
oh, okay, cool.
yeah, plenty of time for questions and comments and everything. So first of all, thank you, Connor. That was really fantastic. What a great overview of this. So interesting. I love the use of community scientists to engage with nature like this. It's so important. So there are a couple of questions in the chat. Well, there's a couple of like sort of comments about how great this is, but there is one question that was posted a little earlier in the talk by Anne.
Sorry, you should read it though for the recording.
Sure, yeah. So it's how to transfer my bird call from BirdNET to an eBird report. Do I need to use Merlin to do this? Is the question.
Unfortunately, there's not. The two apps are essentially parallel, so they're not integrated. I'd love to see that happen, and I think ultimately it could and maybe should, but on some level, like the app was something that Stefan made, the BirdNET app Stefan made kind of as part of his computer science PhD, and so it sort of started as a somewhat informal project, and it's grown into this big science platform. And so it's not as integrated with the other lab products as it could be, but it's kind of as soon as we can scrounge up the money to hire like a full-time app developer and do a lot of coordination with the other science, like citizen science projects at the lab, and figure out how does this stuff get classified and everything. I would very much like for it to be integrated, but I guess if you really want to put it in your eBird, you might have to just do it manually. So yes, not the best answer, but it's a true one.
Great. Yeah, so if anyone has questions, throw them in the chat or just speak up. You can unmute yourself and speak up, or if you want to use the raise your hand function, I can call on you, but we'll just do this organically. So does anyone have any questions?
I think I'd like to say a couple of things here to Connor. First of all, this is fascinating stuff. And I know that this has been in development for a few years, but it's not a long time. Some of the things you talked about this evening really stimulated me to think. Just by a little bit of background, I was at the Cornell Lab 40 years ago, and to see the development of what was the Library of Natural Sounds, still is, into what you're able to do is just really remarkable. I think the then director of the Library of Natural Sounds, Jim Gullidge, who took over from Peter Paul Kellogg, would be immensely proud of what you've been able to accomplish. So congratulations, that's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean that sincerely. It's just really wonderful to see young scientists like yourself just really moving along and taking the work of the past and really projecting it into the future, which leads me to posit this. Much of my early career was devoted to censusing bird populations, particularly wading birds. And there's a problem with wading birds when you're trying to census them, particularly as has been conventionally done with aircraft, either drones or fixed wing light aircraft. And that is, it's very difficult to separate the white birds from the dark birds in a nesting colony, and that leads to a lot of imprecision. It just strikes me in listening to what you've had to say here about positioning sensors to get acoustic information that might be an approach that that could be used in censusing these colonially nesting birds in these dense colonies. They're very vocal. They make a lot of noise all the time. And I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about the level of precision that could be achieved in being able to determine differences in the acoustic signatures of different species of these birds. And if you could do this, whether that might lead to the possibility of using acoustic information from a colony rather than visual information from a colony to estimate populations of different species, in a given period of time, say during the nesting season. That could be revolutionary and could be much less invasive than what we're seeing now, which is a tendency for wildlife biologists involved with these birds to use drones, which are, if they get too close, or at least as disruptive as a fixed wing aircraft. Just wondering about your thoughts about the possibility of that and whether the technology would be able to do that, or what would be necessary for the technology to be able to pull that kind of thing off.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. I'm the one person giving this talk, but hopefully it was clear that there's been many people's hard work and dedication have gone into all these advances. So it's very much a progressive effort and a team effort. And that's part of what makes it fun for me, is like working with the computer scientists is kind of what one of my closest colleagues is fundamentally in a very different discipline. So that's fun. And then the recording unit you see here in this picture was designed by a guy named Rob in our group at the lab. And so it's fun to have a team of ecologists, which is kind of standard for academia, but then also computer scientists and hardware engineers, software programmers. It's really fun. And they all contribute to making this happen. So that, I always want to reiterate that. This picture actually, incidentally, is from a field site where I'm attempting to get at that exact question. So this picture here is from a wetland complex in southwestern Montana, where it's an artificial wetland complex. And so there's massive amounts of breeding birds that come through every spring and fall. And so the reason there's a wetland complex is because there was a catastrophic toxic waste event about a century ago. And so they created these holding ponds, which were super poisonous for a long time and now are really important migratory stopover. And so they're doing visual counts of these sites. And what we're trying to do is we deploy these units this fall, and we want to then compare acoustic results to those visual counts to get exactly at that question. Can we start to measure? They're not exactly, it's essentially a colonial setting. You have a ton of birds compressed into a small area, all very vocally active. Although in the fall, they were really depressingly quiet, depressing from a passive acoustic survey perspective. The question is, there's a couple ways of I've been thinking about it. One, and what I'm hoping works, is looking at detection counts. So a lot of the models I have used so far are fundamentally binary. The species is present at the site or the species is not present. And that's really useful when you have territorial species or the individuals are relatively spaced out. But on some level, if you have 1,000 ducks, there's probably going to be more quacking than if you have 100 ducks or 10 ducks or 1. And I think that the precision of that relationship will go down substantially as your abundance goes up.
Yep.
But I think from a management perspective, that might not be so bad, because knowing the difference between 1,000 ducks and 1,010, I have a hard time imagining that being a essential piece of information. So that is what I think there's going to be, this potentially substantial loss of precision as the true observed, like visual count based bird abundance goes down. But I'm hoping that there will be some relationship between detection counts over the course of the day and that visual observation, because that's the cool thing. You have to pay a pretty good birder to go out there and do these counts. So you can't send them out there day in, day out, but you can, for the cost of a $250 unit, $40 memory card, and 3D batteries, you can listen for a month straight. That is, then you've got to process all the audio and stuff, but still, you can observe for a lot more time. And so want to compare those counts. A second step that I'd like to avoid would then be trying to evaluate some of those just absolute sort of sound chaos, the cacophony of 1,000 birds. You could try to extract actual acoustic information. So what is the peak amplitude, like how loud is it? You know, correlate not just, okay, there was continuous duck detections for 10 minutes with a peak amplitude of this, or it was continuous duck detections, but amplitude was lower. An important part also becomes some sort of behavioral observations, like what is the intrinsic quacking rate of your duck of choice, and recording unit placement. Do you have low counts because there's few ducks, or because there's many ducks at the far side of the pond? So there's a lot of really complicated factors that will go into these abundance estimation projects. They're a little bit daunting, to be honest, but I think that's the direction that we're going. I think you're totally right. That is kind of the next step, is really understanding in detail these populations, not just these sort of spatial patterns of yes, no across the landscape, but yes, and it's 50 or whatever.
Well, I think, you've really given me some reason for encouragement here. It depends, of course, upon your level of precision. But to begin with, if you're willing to deal with non-parametric levels of precision, you'll be fine. You can at least tell the difference between a lot and a little, and that's more than we can have in some of these other detection mechanisms, particularly visual ones. So thank you. That's a very thoughtful answer, and I wish you the best of luck. I think you're into something really exciting here, and with a great deal of potential.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it too. And a fun thing is that I'm working on this toad project I alluded to at the beginning. And on some level, it's the exact same question. Can we get even a crude answer? There are a few toads or there are many toads. In this project, that would be way better, because a lot of these sites, they can't even get to them. Do people need to, I threw these quick slides in. I could blast through them right now. I have to giving a speed talk about it a couple days. So I just tacked them in for fun. But it's essentially the same question as the waterfowl. Do your meetings go to 7:30 or
actually until 8:30? So we have time.
Oh, wow.
And people can stay as long, and you don't have to go all the way till 8:30, but like we've got time if people want to stick around. If people have to go, of course, you're welcome to sign off.
Cool.
But yeah,
maybe I sped up. I thought, okay. Yeah, well then I'll do my little toad kickoff. Yeah. We'll find out who the hardcore birders are. They're the ones that sign out of the Zoom. Like, doesn't have feathers. Don't even speak to me. So cool. This project, let's see. This project I'm calling Listening for the Yosemite Toad. And it started actually because of the owl stuff. I was at a conference in California, and my main collaborator at the Forest Service approached me and said, hey, have you ever heard of the Yosemite toad? And I said, nope. She said, well, they're federally endangered and they make sound. Do you think acoustics might be useful for them? And I said, definitely. I'll need to learn a little more and I'll get back to you. And yeah, I think this is kind of my favorite pet project. It's like a sort of side project of the main bird stuff, but despite growing up in the Midwest, I really like snowboarding. And these toads live in the high mountains of the high Sierra, like the sort of really dramatic, craggy, snowy mountains. And here is the crux of it. They're endangered and understudied. The Yosemite toad is declining across its range, and the only place in the world it lives is basically a 200-mile stretch of the Sierra Nevada in California. And it's really rugged terrain, and they're really cryptic, these toads are. So on the left there, you see at the bottom of this like snowy, rocky mountainside, you can see a little pond and a meadow that's very swampy. That's their breeding. That's like prime Yosemite toad breeding habitat. And they breed for about 2 weeks of the year. So for close to half the year, they're buried under the snow. Then for 2 weeks, right when the snow melts, they come out, they congregate in these meadows, and they sing and sing and sing and sing, breed, and then they just disperse off into the landscape and quietly eat little bugs or whatever it is that toads do. Try to get fat so they can survive 6 months under the snow. And basically this means that Yosemite toad monitoring has been limited to these surveys where they're trying to scramble their crews out to as many of these sites as they can, but they're simultaneously breeding across 200 miles of rugged mountains. So you just can't get many people out all at the same time. So with passive acoustics, we can go in before the breeding season when the mountains are still snowed in, go in, deploy recording units across a whole string of these meadows, and then just circle back at the end of the season, pick them up and scan the audio. So in that way, with actually like fewer people, you survey more terrain, but you have to be able to access these deep mountain sites. And so that's the picture on the right is my guide, this really great backcountry snowboarder named Jason, who I took avalanche course from last year, and he and I went out to some of these sites and dropped off recording units. And as I was telling you at the beginning, BirdNET is super flexible, and so Stefan was able to add in Yosemite toads to BirdNET. So for the most part, no one else will know this because no one's hearing Yosemite toads, basically. But I can then take that and scan my toad audio and get toad results. So the plan at the end this March/April, we're going to go back out to the High Sierra and do a major deployment. And so that trilling sound, that's the sound we're looking for. That's some sample audio from last year. That's the Yosemite toad. And we have these modified recording units that are housed in Pelican cases, so really super rugged, waterproof cases, and they've just built the same microphone and like processor into those cases. Stack 6D batteries in, and they'll just run for months. So that little red square there is where we had the unit last year, or one of the units, and that was like our deepest, most remote unit. And I'm thinking for this coming season, that's going to be like the closest unit to civilization. And so the plan is to go up and over that ridge and drop off a whole bunch more sort of beyond that ridge, and then make our way out off sort of the right side of the photo. And to bring it back to, I guess, ducks on some level, it's the same question. Where people have been able to do these surveys, you can go out and at least try to count tadpoles, but then you just know, like, okay, well, that meadow gets a yes for Yosemite toads. With the audio data, even if we can get low, medium, high, that tells us a lot more. And a lot of these meadows are on a multi-year rotation, where the Forest
Sorry,
Service
Connor.
is only able to get to some
Connor.
of these meadows every couple of years.
Connor,
Really?
can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
You're saying about ducks. In what sense did you mean by saying ducks?
Oh,
I'm just
some
curious.
context. I was talking about ducks maybe before you joined. We were talking about measuring the density or the abundance of a target species, not just saying yes, it's present, or no, it's
Oh
not.
yeah. Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. So same basic like computational or challenge here. We can count the number of signals we've observed and then try to match that up. So we're deploying these units also at the few meadows where the Forest Service is able to get crews out and reliably get population counts. So we can line up the acoustic signature from the few meadows where they're doing counts, not just presence, and then use that to calibrate from the data from all across these other meadows. So that is, yeah, it's nice to have, it's a very different project in some ways, like toads instead of birds, and it's very snowy, but some of the thinking that I have to do for these analyses is thinking it's multi-purpose. It's going to be the same challenges as this other project I have.
Yeah, I guess inevitably you have to do a ground truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, I wish I was 40 years younger. I'd go out there with you. That sounds like a great deal of fun.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fun
I
project.
agree, Donald. Donald, that is great. Donald, tell me, what is your opinion on the ducks?
I'm fascinated by Connor's approach to this particular scientific question. I think it's got a lot of broad applicability, and I can't wait to see what you get next spring.
Yeah, me too, Donald. Me too.
Yeah, I'm be happy to chat with you guys again and try to share some results. Hopefully, nothing too grim from the fire study, and
Donald
hopefully
Duck.
some nice positive stuff from the toad work. Yeah, any other questions?
Any other questions for Connor?
Any other questions for Connor?
We got a couple of crashers here.
Jason, you're a liar. You're
All right. Sorry, I'm just gonna remove a couple people here. Gosh, that's never happened to me before. A couple of Zoom crashers, I think. Okay, sorry about that. Connor, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I hope that everyone got a lot out of this. I know that I did. I learned a lot about the app, and I look forward to using it. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was terrific. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Great. Cheers. I'm going to stop recording.